Well, it's Groundhog Day, and we're trying to determine if there's springtime coming for advanced labs and other things. I'm voting in favor of yes. And so I hope that our discussion can sort of focus in part on, measures that we're contemplating to work towards renewal and take what we've learned and hear about what we learned at this discussion and how we translate that with some bias, just my personal biases in the lab arena. One of the things that had Tony and Gabe and I had been batting around a little bit was the idea that, well, in addition to Groundhog Day, we have in February Mardi Gras. And that's why you saw in the posting for this meeting the idea that we would discuss a Mardi Gras celebration of advanced labs. So let me explain a little further about that before sort of moving back to more general grounds. I have this crazy notion that in 2 weeks' time we should continue the celebration that we're doing today, and perhaps one way I could do that is just set up anybody who's interested in advanced labs. I can set up a Zoom meeting for this, and but I thought we could have a Mardi Gras parade of apparatus. And so my idea is that if I can make sure that you all get my email, which I'll type in now, and if any of you want to send a couple of photos of favorite apparatus, I played around this morning with. Let me just make sure that I send this. And okay, so. If you're willing to share a photo of a favorite apparatus of or two or three or four or five, I played around with the Apple slide photo utility this morning, and I figured I could make a slideshow out of this, and then just have it available for people to look at maybe the day before Mardi Gras as our apparatus Mardi Gras parade. And then via this separate Zoom meeting, we could discuss this. And one of my motivations, other than celebrating the joy of working with apparatus, and the joy, frankly, I should mention that one motivation for this is I'm hearing from my students that they miss, the ones that we're mostly remote right now, and they miss being able to use the more substantial gear that they've paid for, and and that they wanted to experience. We're doing good things remotely, and I hope to hear more in our discussion today about what you all are doing. So I'm really pleased with how we've delivered, some value to students remotely. But I do know that they're missing the fancier things, the spectrometers and other things that they don't have access to right now. So I'm eager to sort of create this sort of parade of apparatus that maybe we can share with students, and then also a motivation is that we, like perhaps many of you, go through annual budget cycles, and we're of course enduring a lot of uncertainty in budgets right now. But if the skies open up and maybe manna doesn't rain from heaven, but some funding comes, what shall we use it for? How can we think about beneficial uses in equipment that we can furnish to our students? So that's the other motivation for this parade. So again, I would just right now at this introduction invite you to, after this meeting, send some pictures, and I will put together a slideshow and try to get it out Monday just before Mardi Gras, and then we can have a follow-up Zoom discussion. But now I thought I'd sort of open this up for general discussion, for talking about maybe with a focus on apparatus and how you envision transitioning from our remote environment back into the full shebang. So I'll just open it up. if I need to seed this, let me seed this discussion this way. What's what's your favorite apparatus? Or what do you miss most if you're not in your lab right now?
Anything that generates ozone.
Helmholtz coils for me.
Helmholtz coils, okay. And ozone generators. Interestingly, I read this morning on one of my gadget feeds an article about development of an ozone generator to purify water or to decontaminate water.
Yeah.
I live in the live in the foothills in Colorado, and I worry about our well water. So I'm interested also in ozone generators.
So that's a standard thing in Europe, instead of using chlorine for swimming pools, to use ozone generators. And so you can get them at pool shops, and they generate about 3% ozone. And I would pass that through a homemade little glass coil that I would surround with liquid nitrogen. And I'd liquefy the mixture and then pump on it. And you get pure ozone, which is a completely beautiful and very dangerous substance, because it is completely unstable. If you suddenly change anything, it will explode. So I had it, of course, properly enclosed, but it is absolutely gorgeous.
How so? What does it look like?
Well, the color, I mean, the color of plain old oxygen is kind of dull and drab, but it is fun to play with. You know, it's paramagnetic. Pour it between magnet poles and it wants to hang out there. But the ozone, the color is incredibly vibrant. It's this beautiful purple. And I used it for making high temperature superconductors, but more efficiently. But it's just kicks and grins.
So this, I take it, Gabe, this was not in your basement.
A basement.
Oh, it was in a basement.
I'm a
Okay.
denizen of basements in general. That's my natural habitat.
Okay. All right. So speaking of Helmholtz coils, I have a student who's been enraptured with Tesla coils. And I'm trying to keep him away from high voltage spark gaps because he's working at home. So we're looking at sort of a more general notion of resonant coils and driving coils and doing energy exchange with resonant coils. And so I'm really trying hard to keep my student healthy with working with coils. Other apparatus that have...
I just had my sophomore level students build labs for my first year students, the intro students, where you can get plate magnets, 1.5 inches in diameter for $5. And a couple of those, they made little 3D printed holders so that these things are attracted but kept apart. And put them on something that you can move around, a little turntable that is kind of a plate or something, where you can measure the angle. And this way you get a field that is strong compared to the Earth's field, which you can neglect. So the field doesn't have to point north, it can point east or south or whichever way the students orient their little turntable. And then they hang down into there a little probe, which the circuit was made by these older students. And the younger students are only just told it's a sensor where you get a voltage out that's proportional to the signal you're measuring. And the students wrote procedural for the sophomores wrote a procedural for the first year students that I thought was really fun. I mean, they first have them thinking about riding in a car with their hand out into the breeze and how it changes as you move your hand from this orientation to that orientation. And it's the same thing they're doing. Their fixed sensor is held as they're changing the orientation of the field. and the students discover, the young students discover the notion of flux without being told much of anything. So we had fun, and it's all cheap as can be.
That's lovely. May I ask what the sensor was?
Well, the students, the older students all have kits which have various magnetic sensors in them, but this one, I'll look up what the one, there's an analog devices one that some of them used, and
Gabe, when you
put
say a kit, you mean like a kit for like a sensor kit? Like I bought
Yeah.
an Elegoo kit that's got like 32 different kinds of sensors, but they're mostly for Arduino.
Yeah, so my kits came when I bought the student package for these Digilent Analog Discovery 2 boxes that are just, DACs that are, and it comes with magnetic field sensors and all sorts of things. But I'll post there's what I used in the chat.
Actually, that's by itself a good topic. How many who else has used kits of some sort? Tony, I've also used, right now I'm using the Elegoo Super Starter Kit. I mean,
Yeah, I have
they
something like that.
so it's got a pretty good array of sensors. In fact, I think it has an MMU that's supposed to have, I think, multi degrees of freedom, including magnetic sensor. But I haven't had my students this year play around with that. I did a couple of years ago. But who else is using a kit like that? What are you using? Anyone?
I just use vernier. I've got a closet full of vernier tools with all sorts of sensors, but those are pretty basic,
Okay.
Yeah.
But for the vernier sensors, this is for use in lab as opposed to remote.
Yeah. Of course, I do it on a much lower level than university classes. This is informal stuff on television and that sort of thing. But we use the sensors all the time.
Oh wow. Okay.
We made a big the other day. We made a big. We have a 20-foot tall ceiling in the studio, so we made a big vortex tornado in the room, and used smoke dry ice smoke to see it, and used, I don't know, maybe 20 fans in the room to get it to spin. Then we had a big exhaust fan that we borrowed to suck the air out of the room, and got a very nice. And we used the vernier. And I had the kids sneak up on the funnel and try to predict what what would be the pattern of the topography of the air pressure changes inside and outside. And I had them plot a graph, and then we measured it to see how accurately they predicted it would be. See what the low pressure areas were in a tornado and the high pressure areas and that sort of thing.
That's marvelous. That tornado vortex, I know the artist at the Exploratorium, Ned Kahn, who made the version of that at the Exploratorium. Is the design of the one you implemented, is that available anywhere?
Well, let me get a picture here. I'll share it with you. No, it's pretty easy to do. See if I've got. Give me a second. Yeah, here we go. I don't know. Can I share?
You should be able to.
Okay.
Oh, that's marvelous.
And then we'd have the kids try to sneak up on the what do you call that? I'm not a meteorologist, but they take readings, the air pressure inside and out, and plot it. And the really fun thing was to have them watch them try to sneak up, because I guess that vortex is weightless. I mean, you can just wave your arm and make it move, because you disturb the pattern. So to watch the kids try to sneak up on that thing was more fun than the actual physics.
Yeah, no, that's what I observed in the Exploratorium, is that it's very interactive.
Okay.
That's wonderful.
So yeah, I just borrowed the fan. Yeah.
Huh.
There you go.
That's lovely. So who else has either tornadoes or kits in your inventory? Mark?
I have neither kits nor tornadoes, but I am curious. You did mention something about Arduinos, and I am not to completely hijack your question, but I am curious. What is your favorite thing to do with an Arduino?
Oh, well, let me put that out. I have some things, but I'm just curious. Let's see what others answer for that. Anyone?
I don't think there's a favorite thing. I think the favorite thing is just saying, here's an Arduino, do what you do. Like they just make up anything they can do with an Arduino. We use it for a lot of different things.
I know something I've been working on, and I've been involved in a discussion group that Paul's in, that actually interacting with people in the Netherlands and in Europe, talking about just this question. I mean, Arduino and other sort of makerspace type things. And but one of the things that I've been keen on is being able to control the Arduino from using Python on the computer.
Yeah.
And so using Pyformata, or I have dreams in my, my second life, once I clone myself, of making my own firmware that's a little more versatile than the Pyformata, so that I can do other things. But I guess one of the fun things that we did with junior lab students in this past semester was to characterize the ultrasound sensor that came in the Elegoo kit that was operated by the Arduino. But we used the analog device's ADAM 2000 as an oscilloscope to look at the ultrasound pulses. So we used all of these gadgets together.
I use the Arduino. I guess my favorite thing that I've done with it now as part of our advanced lab is I remember in the old days, Pasco made a really nice analog fiber optic light sensor for, it was a really good. And so when I came to my new place, they didn't have it, and you just can't buy it. You can get it off eBay or whatever. But so I started looking at light sensors, and those ones, the new ones they had that look like pencils, I think they're pretty terrible. And I didn't want to have to hook it up to a Pasco interface. So I found a little breakout board that Adafruit makes with a really nice light sensor chip on it. And then I used the Arduino, and then the students and I together figured out how to make the Python software be able to plot data in real time. So you can do, I mean, then it's just like it acts like a photo, it's a light sensor. So you can do whatever you need to do with light sensor. You can do spectroscopy, you can do scattering. Right now we're doing reflectance measurements. As long as you point the fiber optic right on top of the little chip, it's very sensitive, it'll tell you 3 spectral ranges. It'll tell you IR, UV, and vis right on the, full range visible in the data that comes out.
Nice.
And we run it with Python interface on the Arduino, so it works out pretty good, I think.
You wrote your own Python data grabber to.
Well, me and a bunch of students, we went through, like one student did it as her summer research project to figure out how to, real time. And so she even did on the chip. So she does a time average, and then she runs statistics on so the code will run statistics on the uncertainty and at every point, at every data point. It's pretty nice.
Does it, so then including some smoothing on it?
Yeah, yeah.
Very good.
Yeah, so I think the hardest part was figuring out how to force Python to update a graph in a timely fashion.
Yeah.
I
had to resort to using PyQt to do that, to get it fast enough. I don't know. We're getting into the weeds. I don't know if this is what we really want to do, but it's nice to know that we share each other's pain and joy in getting solving these riddles. Tony, I'd love to hear more about how that was done. So, but I guess let's see. I'm intrigued. I'm still intrigued by this tornado, because I'm very I actually another thing related to tornadoes is convective plumes. And I'm wondering if anybody has done any experiments with convection experiments, and visualizing convective plumes.
Describe to me what that is. I'm sorry.
A mushroom cloud, but in a beaker.
Oh, in a beaker.
Yeah, like I was writing an article for some lectures once, and since I'm a fluid mechanic, so I put a drop of dye at the bottom of a beaker and then gently heated it on the stovetop and managed to just snag a pretty nice picture of an evolving mushroom-shaped
Mushroom.
convective
I
plume.
think I can find one, a picture here. See if I can
I bet
share.
you can.
Hold on. Here's a, I'll share again. I don't know if that, did that come up?
Not yet.
Okay. Okay. Let me, there. That, oh, that's the same one. That was a different one, but you can see that the kid's got a vernier calculator in his hand with a probe that went
Oh,
into
okay.
the tornado.
I was wondering
What
how
makes
they did
that work? You could make one just with some household fans in a room. If at the top, you can't see it, but we had to put a big tarp up on the ceiling and put a hole in the center, the exact size of the tarp. The tarp was about 20 foot square so that the air wouldn't short circuit and come right back down. So you have to have a big hole in the ceiling somehow, kind of like a bath, upside down bathtub in order to get that. But once you put that tarp up high on the ceiling for the air to all kind of run towards, it'll make a nice vortex.
very nice.
Yeah, okay. Let me find a mushroom. So I'll find a mushroom here. I don't know. You can go ahead and talk. I'll find one.
Okay, I guess while Steve, you're looking for that, I'll mention that Ned Kahn, who built this tornado, I guess he made one for Universal Studios that's like several stories high, and then implemented one for an exhibit in Germany. And he told me a funny story about having to go at the last minute and tune all the fans for the one in Germany. And I guess that's part of the artistry of making this device, is getting all those fans tuned up right.
Yeah. Let's see if I can get this one. I don't know. Did that show up?
Oh yeah, that's a true turbulent.
That was from
Yeah.
1953 or 4, you know.
Yeah.
And that was Mr. Wizard. And I'll remember what that is. Give me a second. I'll tell you what that smoke is to get the mushroom. And I can't remember what the mixture is, but it'll come to me and I'll show it to you. I'll tell you what that it was.
Well, okay. Again, what we're trying to do is locally heat an air mass with a small heater, and we're actually trying to simulate changes in albedo on rooftops to explore how convective plumes might emerge from rooftops and start to deal with issues having to do with the urban heat island. So I'm hoping to sort of bridge, fluid mechanics and flow visualization with an immediate human problem, and have fun with the fluid mechanics along the way. So I guess, again, the general topic of discussion for those who have joined us, I've been sort of looking through the list, and we're trying to use today's being Groundhog Day to imagine a reemergence of springtime for scientific apparatus and laboratory work. And what would you or students be most eager to get their hands on back in the lab? What's an apparatus that would be a joyful experience for students to work with once they got past the frustrations of knowing which knob to turn? Let me turn this around while we contemplate fancy things, go the other direction to not fancy. I dealt with, as I think many of you did, how do you, maybe many of you had to confront, how do you facilitate take-home labs with rudimentary materials and attention to safety. And I was constrained with, for my first year students, these are first year physics majors, I had a pretty ambitious schedule of lab topics I wanted them to do. But the constraint was that I had one student who was pretty much confined to quarters in her dorm room. And so I had to think of experiments that she could do, not with fancy equipment, but with whatever she could get her hands on going down the hallway in the dorm. And I was really pleased. One of the things that I have been trying to do, those of you who know me, is to acquaint physics students with practical problems. And a practical problem I've had to deal with, and the technical competencies needed to solve the practical problem. So one I biographically have had to deal with at our home in the foothills of Colorado is the joys of owning a septic system that's not working. And I had to come to grips with how water does or does not flow through soils. So I thought, okay, what the heck? Let's make a undergraduate experiment on liquid transport through porous media and investigate Darcy's law that basically says that the flow rate is proportional to the pressure gradient. And so how do you do an experiment like that in a dorm room where the most sophisticated apparatus you can get are paper towels and Coke bottles? And that's just it. By sticking 2 Coke bottles back to back with a paper towel plug in between the two, and then using physics tracker software, they could follow the interface as it drained through the porous plug. So that's just a personal story of how to make do with dorm room materials. I'd just love to hear if what other things have people come up with for well, while you don't have access to your $60,000 grading spectrometer, what are you using?
I live my whole life. My whole laboratory is filled with non-$60,000 stuff. So it's like I could talk for days on what you can do for 50 cents or a nickel.
I'm going to come hang out
of young students so far this year has been, I guess there's some optics involved. Physics is hanging a drop of water from a pond out of a plastic syringe or dropper, and then aiming a cheap laser pointer through it and getting the image on the wall in a dark room. It drives them crazy. And then trying to figure out what liquids would make a better lens, corn syrup or whatever. But I had more success with that silly little thing than, kids were afraid to walk across the yard after they saw those things were in the water out there.
Gabe, I remember seeing an experiment like that in your labs.
We've played a lot with droplet lenses using not water because it's less stable, but bathroom caulk, which is what PDMS is. Huh. And I just asked Dow, I said, this is for education, and they sent me a ton of the stuff.
Is it clear? Is
for
it transparent?
Free? Yeah, PDMS is transparent. And so the students, I've done it with fourth graders too, and they don't have the motor skills to make a nice droplet on a slide. But if we have them make a bad droplet on a slide and then put it in the oven and come back to them after they've been doing something else, if they do it 3 times, even the worst motor skills will make a beautiful droplet lens.
Oh,
so
listen,
make your droplet and then you hang it in the oven.
Sure.
It becomes something wonderful. You can peel off. And if you have anything that generates a little plasma, it helps to make it sticky. So you can put it onto your cell phone multiple times and take it off. And then, of course, they can see the pixels on their screen or go outside. You can even make, if you put a little dye in, optical tweezers with the things, where you're using your cell phone as your microscope. You don't want to blind the sensor on your cell phone.
Well, who is this bearded man named Gabe? My gosh, this is a bit of heaven for me. Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, no, it's Gabe, another thing I put to you and to others in the discussion, you mentioned in passing the having a plasma source for making things sticky. And I remember you had a commercial unit that looked that I'd love to get my hands on, but I'd like to know if there's a $20 version of that could be done.
Well, yeah, if you have Odin's wand or anything else that gets a high voltage, you can make a little bit of plasma near the tip. And you
Okay,
don't need much in order to make something sticky. So
okay. Has anyone else done microfluidics in labs with PDMS or other materials? That's something that I'm interested in learning about when I'm back in the real digs.
So I have a lot of experience in biophysics labs,
Cool.
particularly with neuroscience type things. And my favorite tool was I got a resin 3D printer from Form Labs. And those resin 3D printers, you can really make really nice watertight things for putting fluid through. And we would make a lot of dissection chambers where we had some nerve tissue inside, and we need to have nice fluidic, nice channels to pull in different types of salts. And we were able to, 3D print that as a block that had everything internal in it, and it was wonderful.
What was the typical channel size in that?
Well, because the resin printers are photolithographic, can't talk, right? So it's only dictated by the size of the laser you can focus. So you can
Truly
get
micro.
a pretty pinpoint small thing with this, and the resin 3D printers are fun.
Nice to
They're
know.
not cheap and they're messy,
So
but they're a lot of fun.
the cheap end
Mark, what's
is
cheap? What's not cheap? What,
Well,
what does that mean? How much is not cheap?
I think they're like $2,500.
Oh, because I'm looking at, I need a new printer. I need a new 3D printer right now. So I'm looking around.
Yeah, check out Form Labs, and it's not a filament printer; it's a resin printer. So it's kind of fun to watch too because it prints upside down.
Is that SLA? Like it's
There's
laser
lots of different
melt.
types of stuff
Yeah.
you can have, but it's all resin. It has a really good flexible one, and I made a lot of stuff that was squishy with my 3D printer.
So
I also
first-
made in the clear resin. I've also made some lenses out of that too. They're not perfect. They have some impurities, but they're not bad. And they're only messy when you have kids that are not careful, and because the resin itself is very viscous and very sticky, and if they're not careful with it, they spill it, and then the only solvent is isopropanol. So then you got to clean it up with isopropanol, and then they set themselves on fire. It's kind of a series of unfortunate events.
I have something related to that actually impacts on COVID, but I wanted to ask Gabe to mention you were going to speak up about something on microfluidics.
Well, I put in the chat that you can make very cheap microfluidics with a hot plate, parafilm, and an X-Acto knife. You have some microscope slides and you just put that stuff in there and that will do something for you. And I guess I can show you my screen there. And what I think you're seeing, are you seeing some funny pattern?
Yes.
Well, over here, that's where you punch into the PDMS and you're putting in, let's say your aqueous solution there, which this is filtering. And then it comes around over here. Well, I guess here is where we're putting the oil, and here's where we put the aqueous stuff that might contain DNA fragments. And when they come together just off the page here, and these are just buffers to get rid of the syringe pump motor noise, then we make monodispersed droplets, all, when we do it, 5 micron droplets, each one containing one nanocomponent, one DNA sort of thing, and they're optically trappable because they're 5 microns. So
Wonderful. So just hearing Mark talk about resins, and again, I'm sort of dancing around the central topic of apparatus, but one of the things that I asked lab students to think about at the beginning of the pandemic shutdown was, well, if you were to try to work on something that would mitigate some need in the COVID crisis, with physics, what might that be? And I gave them an assignment to, come up with a white paper, at least if they could not actually implement it. And what had motivated this was a email from a former student who was in the front lines of medical care with a shortage of face masks last April. And the question she was posing is, what other materials could be used? Are there any materials at local hardware stores that would have the properties of trapping particles in the right range and the right mechanisms? And I had looked into the issue of, I guess the N95s are made in what's called a non-woven fabric using polypropylene. And it got into sort of the weeds of the science of how you do that with sticky resins. And I'm just curious, did anyone else, not necessarily thinking about face masks, but other topics had come up like respirators. I'm actually going to have students work this semester on trying to look at mixing and turbulence in room spaces. Has anyone else had experiments or student engagements that are motivated by things with the COVID?
I think I'm going to try my advanced lab this semester to set up a little experiment that looks like the one that Ad Bax did that he talked about at the winter meeting. I mean, that's, we're not going to get much quantitative data out of it, but to be able to image speech droplets with a laser, I've got a little green diode laser, I think that'll work. It's a little bit of optics and some imaging. I think I'm going to try it.
I love that talk. I think students will enjoy saying spit happens.
Yeah.
But it was really sobering.
Yeah, and pretty simple experimental setup, but the what he sort of discovered and tried to preach to everybody was pretty important, I think.
Yeah.
Early on when people weren't wearing masks. So
it was revealing. Yeah.
Yeah.
One thing we also did was, since I didn't want to deal with, putting stinky stuff into dorm rooms and seeing how long it took to exhaust out. Again, it was a Coke bottle experiment where we did successive dilutions of coffee into a fresh water mixture, where coffee was representing, excess CO2 or something in a room. And it actually produced a wonderful template of, as you did, a couple of dozen successive dilutions, it brought home just why ventilation manuals tell you to have so many turnovers per hour of air in the room. And you can look at the requirements that were established for hospital facilities to have, I think, don't quote me on this, but I think it was 12 turnovers per hour for room air in order to get contaminants out of there in an efficient way. But this Coke bottle and coffee mixing thing was again a dorm room solution for bringing that point home. So so that was just another thing. We're getting, I want to, for those who joined us in sort of midst,
oh my God.
a little bit into the session, I wanted to advertise the idea that I would like to collect photos of interesting apparatus, either fancy apparatus or improvised apparatus. We could have different classes of this, and prepare a Mardi Gras parade of apparatus to display in a couple weeks' time. And I put my email into the chat. I'm not sure, I'm not a legal eagle. I don't know what to do about copyright. I hope that people will do this in the spirit of sharing. And obviously it would be share with attribution so that your name and your institution would be attached to the photo if you send it to me. My goal is to put together this slideshow and make it a Mardi Gras parade of apparatus. I went to the Mardi Gras website and look at videos of various parade activities, and was amused to see a parade activity that included an armed easy chair parade for guys my age, and that's not what I want to do. I want to have an apparatus parade that will be animated by the slide mechanisms. So anyway, that's the ad. But back to discussion. Again, the motivation for having today's theme being on apparatus, one motivation was the desire for students to get back to apparatus. The other is sort of the idea that a white paper is coming forth or has come forth within the AAPT undergraduate community for advocating that NSF fund, return to funding the development of laboratories. And, I'm thinking, well, it would be great if we, emerged with some really keen ideas of the types of apparatus we'd like to make sure students visit during their undergraduate tenure. And so that, that idea of what would we as a community like to make sure that we can afford to put in front of our students motivates this discussion. So with that in mind, does anyone want to bring up other kinds of apparatus that maybe the budget's an obstacle, but if the apparatus is revealing enough in physics, is there a way we need to target getting funding for it? $2,500 for a 3D printer is maybe reachable for most, but it's fitting into a larger budget. What about 25,000 for for something? We bought a used network analyzer, and I point it out to students and say that thing on the bench is the cost of maybe mid-class BMW. It's a little kind of scary. I'm afraid somebody's going to walk off with it someday. But what are what would be your pride and joy in your lab, Mark?
I admit the utility of this is maybe not the best, but the device in that $25,000 range that gets the most wow factor from the students I've worked with is there's some really nice desktop SEMs out there that are about the size of a computer tower. I have amazing resolution, and you can really just look at things in such an amazing detail and really dig down, and even getting X-ray response from the SEM and looking at the X-ray scattering as it comes back up is also available in little desktop models, and it's a great experience for kids.
I was saying exactly the same thing. Great minds, I guess. I've often dreamt of having one.
I have two old ones in my garage, but they're not functioning. I'd love to get, and big ones. Desktop sounds really intriguing. What, can you name a manufacturer or put that in?
Yes, I'm trying to think of the manufacturer.
Well,
fine.
We can follow up on that. And so I'd love to know. And that brings to mind another thing. We had talked about kits, and this is a sort of for me a dream kit, but hard to figure out how to realize, which is a charged particle optics kit. And I came across, when I arrived in Denver, I came across a box that had a bunch of little components that looked like it was just that. And I'm just curious if anybody has ever seen something like this, that's sort of a Lego kit for making charged particle optics. Is this totally crazy?
There used to
Steve,
be.
you have this in your, yeah, Gabe?
there used to be kits for vacuum tubes, where you could make all your own vacuum tubes with all sorts of things in there.
Okay.
And then what's the name of the company? They make their money from the lanthanum hexaboride filaments for electron microscopes, but
Oh.
they make all sorts of optics, charged particle optics stuff. And they have donated things to the advanced lab community before, but I'm blanking on the name of the company.
Well, that would be great. And again, a follow-up later if possible. Well, one final thing, we're approaching end of time in our discussion, but again, Groundhog Day being, this is supposed to launch a, a springtime fever for, returning to the joy of working with apparatus. So maybe I'll sort of, as a final topic, Tony had mentioned using the Elegoo kit with electronics and sensors. And the other kind of kit that I've wondered is there a comparable thing in terms of optics? I mean, I imagine that Edmund has had, something sort of like this, but in terms of having something affordable that could serve, remote learning, is there any such thing that anyone can recommend for optics beyond just the handy optics that's built into your cell phone or water droplets? I can contact Elegoo to see if they'll make something. As you can see, I spend a lot of time with dreaming up different kinds of.
Well, I really appreciate the discussion on those lenses. I think that's something that I want to take advantage of. So thanks for mentioning that. Those are great ideas. I want to mention one thing before we go. Dr. Sanchez, Eric Sanchez at Portland State University, recently revealed that he had been working under NDA on a $1,000 SEM. The plan is to make this high school purchasable. This is where you can have multiple. They're cheap enough that you can have multiples, and you can have them at your high school level all around the country. And these are kits to make your own SEM. And the hard part was the electron collimators, and he's got that figured out. I'm afraid I don't know more about it than that, but it sounded relevant to kind of something that you might be able to do. This is, you buy the stuff and you assemble it yourself, but this is really pushing the price down on what we could do with electron microscopy.
That's marvelous.
Eric Sanchez of Portland State, he's done a lot of cool things.
He does, and it's always under NDA, which is why he can never tell us about it, but every once in a while he gets to the point where he can reveal what he's been working on in the cave.
If you're ever in Portland, go visit him, tell him you teach. And he's taken many of us down to his storeroom and just said, what do you want?
Wow.
And he's done a lot of nice things for our community, I'll tell you.
Well, now that's the second reason I have to stay away from Portland. The first reason being Powell's books.
Yeah. You'll bring home a lot more than you came to Portland with. Yeah.
Voodoo Donuts.
I loved it.
That's the
I'm
reason.
sorry that we couldn't go. So Mark, thank you for this. Are we, again, I just want to encourage people to send any favorite apparatus photos and Mark, I'll let you close out.
Yeah, it's great. I love these conversations. I so appreciate kind of hearing what everybody's doing and the community that we build by coming together every 2 weeks and just talking about things. These coffee hours have been really wonderful for that. It's always wonderful to see everybody and to hear the great stories that people share. So thank you again very much for coming.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Mark, Mike, and Beth. Thank you. AAPT is doing great service to all of us. Thank you.
You're a good man, Randall.
Take care.
All right.
Come see you, Steve, in your digs.
All right. Bye, man.
Bye-bye.
This was a good one, buddy. This was